What is something you opted out of that went horribly wrong for those that went through with it? A group of my friends were smoking synthetic marijuana at a party in the days where it was a new thing and had not made the news for the adverse effects it causes. I turned it down because I had college the next day and had to go home and rest up. I heard the next day that 2 of my buddies had ended up in hospital having suffered seizures and the third had suffered temporary heart problems. 14 people died when a viewing platform collapsed. It took 2 hours for the first responders to get there, which was no fault of theirs. It was simply rough terrain and isolated. 2 of my mates died there, and I was meant to go, but was hungover as heck. I worked with the engineer who designed the platform about 3 years later, and the poor guy still believed it was his fault, which it was not. He designed it perfectly. The workers who constructed it used the wrong size bolts. Not me, but my parents. They had planned a trip to Virginia Beach with a close friend of theirs. They were to take a small plane down, spend a few days, then fly back. My uncle worked for a local radio station at the time and was given a few tickets to see The Who. He offered his spares to my mom and dad, who accepted even though it was the same weekend as the planned beach trip. Their friend ended up going, but the flight back never made it. The pilot was advised not to depart, as there was severe weather along his flight path, but he went for it anyways. The plane crashed with no survivors. If it were not for them deciding to go see The Who, I would not be here. I am named after the friend that died, and was coincidentally born a year after the day they found out. Not me, but back in the early 80s my dad was diagnosed with leukemia. I do not have all details correct, but the gist of it is, him along with several other people with the same affliction were given the choice to undergo the traditional method of treatment involving bone marrow transplants and whatnot, or go through with some kind of newer, experimental version of chemotherapy. Out of the group of around 10 people, him and a Catholic priest chose chemo, while the others chose the bone marrow transplants. My father and the priest were the only ones to survive. A few years ago, when I was just starting out at my first job out of high school, part-time minute wage, the works, my friend came to me with a great idea he had for a living situation: a nearby 5-bedroom house with lots of space that would be great for parties, and it would be super affordable since rent would be split 6 ways. I opted out because I did not have a car, and there were no buses in the area. My friend really wanted this house, so he kept asking around to any friends of friends that were looking to move. He thought he had gotten a pretty good group of people together, and he only did not know 2 of the people, so it seemed okay at first. I went over there for parties every now and then, and every time I went there, I heard about something new going wrong. First, one of the guys living there was a quiet, solitary type, who wanted out as soon as he realized that he basically moved into a frat house with people he did not know. The other roommate that was kind of outside of our friend group had a string of emergencies that prevented her from paying rent, which meant that everyone else there had to throw down even more to make ends meet. One of my friends, already starting to get into debt, moved back in with his parents and kept trying to get his money back from everyone else who was in the same situation and did not have any money to give. After most of the people had left, my friend had to get more friends of friends to live there in order to get through the rest of the lease. There were a lot of people trashing the house on a regular basis, including people that lived there and did not have jobs, but refused to do any cleaning. And the people who had jobs were working so much to pay for everything that the house just went to shit, quite literally. They had a very misbehaved dog that shat in the house. After their second set of roommates ended up being total assholes or having medical issues that forced them to move out, the year-long lease was finally up, and even after spending a week of solid cleaning and fixing things themselves, they still did not get any of their security deposit back because parts of the house had gotten so jacked up. As I was helping my friends clean the house, they asked me, "Want to move in with us into a 4-bedroom house in the next town over?" I said no politely, and, again, watched things get worse for them all over at their new house. I was on a small elevator with about 15 other high schoolers, and several more were getting on. We were all headed to a baseball game. I decided I wanted no part of that crush of people and got off. The elevator ended up getting stuck between floors for over an hour and several kids threw up. I left my friend's 18th birthday party where everyone was already smashed at approx. 7:00 p.m. Came back around 10 and pulled into the alley right in front of the police. Everyone went to jail but me and a very intoxicated friend who was passed out behind a shed, and the police did not see him. Company I worked for, large multinational, relocated the division headquarters from where they had moved me 5 years before to a shithole city. They called it a lateral move, so there would be no pay increase. I took the severance package and negotiated 6 additional months of work to train my replacements. During the 6 months I also got to attend a major user conference on the company expense bonus. With 2 months left in my tenure, they announced they were dissolving the division and selling off the resources. Most of my CO workers were left unemployed in a new city with no connections or prospects. I, on the other hand, stopped working on my designated day, a Friday, and started working my next job, for more money, the next Monday, with a nice fat severance check arriving 4 weeks later. On a road trip, everyone stopped at a Sonic and got burgers. I did not get anything because I did not want to be too gassy in the car. Everyone got terrible food poisoning, except me. Thankfully this was not me, but my friend was involved in it. A family was out making their first tandem skydive together at my home drop zone. The girl, I will call her Lucky, had just turned 18 and she wanted to do a skydive but did not want to go first once she arrived at the drop zone. In addition to Lucky, her grandmother, the 75-year-old Claudette, wanted to skydive to check it off her bucket list. I skydived out of this small drop zone north of Las Vegas. It had one Cessna 182 and one tandem instructor at times. Because of this, only one person could go on a tandem jump that day. Lucky was too scared to go at first, so Claudette opted to go in her granddaughter's place to show her that everything would be alright. Everything went fine on the free fall portion of the skydive, but when the parachute opened there was some sort of malfunction. The main canopy got tangled up somehow with the reserve and sent Claudette and her tandem skydiving instructor, my friend James Funspec, plummeting towards Earth at a high rate of speed. James was unable to get the parachute opened and they impacted the ground. James, the hero that he was, put his back towards the ground to receive the full impact of the blow. He was trying to save Claudette. Sadly, she would pass away shortly thereafter. As sad as this is, I always think that fate, luck, or whatever you want to call it, put Claudette in the plane that day to save the life of Lucky. When I was much younger, my brother and I carpooled with a friend and his mother to synagogue back when it was required we do so by our parents. One morning in January, both my brother and I woke up with pretty miserable colds, so we were able to get out of going that day. Sick as we were both equally ecstatic to be missing something we never enjoyed going to anyway, and so instead we spent the morning playing StarCraft and Roller Coaster Tycoon. A few hours later my mother gets a phone call from the father of the friend we carpooled with every Saturday. His mom, driving just him that day, had driven over a patch of black ice on a busy city road and nailed a tree head-on. My friend escaped with minor bruises, but his mom was comatose for 3 months. That was a scary what could have been moment in my youth. I was doing one of those really famous obstacle course mud races, got to an obstacle that involved jumping off a 15-foot platform into muddy water. I climbed to the top, took one look down, and freaked out. There was no way to tell how deep the water was because it was so muddy, and here were people smiling and doing flips off the platform into the water. I had tears running down my face from the panic, so I climbed down and ran around it. A few hours after my heat, a guy died on that obstacle due to accidental drowning. He went down and did not come back up and just simply went unnoticed in the excitement and energy of the crowd, which was my fear to begin with. The year of the huge tsunamis was at 2004. My family was supposed to spend Christmas vacation in Thailand visiting my exchange sister and her family there. We could not go in the end because of my dad's work schedule, but the resort we would have been staying at had one of the highest dead and injured counts in the country. A couple of friends from college wanted to go camping one weekend. It sounded fun, so I asked my folks if I could borrow a tent and some supplies as we were big campers when I was young and my friend did not have a tent. It gets closer to the time, and the situation changes to a hike before camping and doing it late in the evening after work to a campground that none of us had ever been to. I knew that the forest gets dark at least an hour earlier than open sky, because of all the trees. I ended up deciding not to go as it just did not sound like a good idea to me. Come to find out later, they went anyways, and my friend's dog who has a problem stomach got sick and had diarrhea in the tent that night. That would have been my tent. My dad was in Vietnam. He had to give up his long-awaited leave to go back to base camp to see a dentist. The rest of his unit got to go to a beach town. My dad was an avid surfer and was really looking forward to it. The whole unit was called to a battle during leave and every single member died. My dad was at the dentist, so he lived. When I was a teenager, we went to the memorial in DC and found all the names of his unit. Too long didn't read I exist because of a shitty tooth. An ancestor of mine opted out of going on the Titanic. Thank you, Ancestor, for not dying before producing offspring that would someday lead to me. When my son did his final year of school, there was an end-of-school lunch party for all the mothers. It was at the home of the school captain and is something of a tradition. My wife was intending to go, but at the last minute decided that she had too much work and stayed at home. There would have been around 70 women at the party. About a third of them were standing on the front veranda when it collapsed, sending everyone on it to the ground. Because of the way it collapsed, everyone at the back plus all of the tables, chairs, bottles, glasses, etc., fell on top of the women at the front. One woman died and many of the others sustained very serious back and leg injuries. Those most hurt were my wife's friends, and she would have been amongst that group if she had attended. Not me, but my dad. He grew up in a rougher area of town. Basically his childhood reads like in the Hinton book. Well, him and his best friend are at a party and my dad decides to leave to hang out with this girl. Never sees his best friend again. All winter his friend is missing and assumed a runaway until spring comes and they find his body in a stack of tires in a storage yard. Apparently my dad and his friend had pissed these two dudes off. Coincidentally, the two suspects die within a year of the body being discovered, one by a house fire and the other carbon monoxide poisoning. Karma is a bee. In Boy Scouts, I was supposed to be the acting senior patrol leader for the week-long summer camp. I was going for my Eagle at the time, and this trip was meant to prove my leadership skills beyond my project. I got pneumonia a couple weeks before the trip and had to pull out. On that trip, there were two very serious incidents that I would not have been able to prevent that would have been blamed on me. First, one of the scouts threw an aerosol can into the fire. No one there was brave enough to fish it out with a stick, so they all ran and hid. It turns out that the scoutmaster was driving into camp about that time. He pulled up to the campsite, stepped out of his jeep, and as he walked over to the fire, the can exploded. A few days after that, a couple scouts both older than me decided to use a spare tent to practice knife throwing. They completely ruined a big canvas tent. It is the only time that coughing so hard that it makes me vomit has ever felt like dodging a bullet. Fatal drunk driving accident. When I was in high school we were dumbasses. One night myself, my friend, and a couple of acquaintances were getting hammered, then decided to go to a party and drink more. Once there, one of the guys tries talking us into going to this chick's house because she is there with her hot friends and no guys were there. The dude had just received his license a month before and was a terrible sober driver. He was so drunk he could barely stand. And I probably would have gone with him anyway because I was an idiot, but I was busy trying to bang this girl at the party and we had just got there, so I did not want to leave. They ended up driving at high speed down a side street, hit a patch of black ice, and smashed into a tree. 2 dead. The only survivor was the driver. His back was 24. He is now severely mentally handicapped. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.